Hi, this is Colin Richards, president and founder of Lord & Richards, and we're talking today about wisdom in financial planning. Specifically, we're going to be talking about what it means to barbell your portfolio. And you know, most people we meet like you are worried about events that are flying out of your control. They're going on every single day, whether foreign or domestic, whether in your local community, whether in our economy or in our markets, whether it's inflation or any other type of event. What we're going to do is help you build a plan to achieve financial independence, to really insulate yourself from those events out of your control so that you can enjoy retirement without worry from a biblical point of view. And the reason we want you to do that is because God has an amazing plan for your life, and we want you to do amazing things for God with the bountiful resources He's placed at your disposal. So today we're going to talk about barbells. Now, you might be thinking, well, Colin, are you talking about getting physically fit? This is going to be a little corny, but here it comes. I'm not talking about being physically fit. I'm talking about being fiscally fit. Isn't that great? Fiscally fit. And the barbell that I'm talking about isn't like lifting weights. It's not putting yourself under stress so that you can grow, although that can be a great advantage from a physical development standpoint. What I'm really going to talk about are some of the lessons we've been learning from our good friend Morgan Housel in his book, The Psychology of Money. And for many of you, you'll say, well, that makes perfect sense. I've been doing that all along. But it's great to have somebody come alongside and say, you know what, this is wisdom. And we've been talking about wisdom. So here's one of the principles that I have for you in this segment. This segment is really going to focus on why you need to start using a barbell in your portfolio, why you need to take an extra step and construct your portfolio a little bit differently than you may have been taught. The first principle is really to learn that we need to buy the haystack, not look for the needle. When it comes to designing a portfolio, one of the mistakes people make is to chase winners and losers, right? And too often we end up finding ourselves chasing losers. But if you buy the whole haystack instead of searching for the needle, you're going to get that needle in the haystack. I'll give you a story that Morgan relates for us. In 1936, Heinz Berggren fled Nazi Germany and settled here in the good old US of A. By the 1990s, late in life, he had become one of the most successful art dealers of all time. And a few years later, he sold part of his massive collection of Picassos, various other great artists to the German government for more than 100 million euros. An incredible sum of money. But actually, the private market value on that collection, hold on to your seat, was over $1 billion of art. So they literally considered it a donation because he took such little money for it. So you ask, how does somebody amass a great collection like that? Or in the art world, we would call it a portfolio of art. Well, one of the research firms out there called Horizon Research tells us that it's more than what you might think. You might think, well, on the one hand, it's skill, right? Isn't that what makes people successful? Or maybe, like Morgan talks about in his book, maybe it's a good mixture of luck. And both of those are involved, right? As a Christian, we call it providence. But how do good collectors become great? How do they amass these fortunes? Well, here's what they said, and I quote, "The great investors bought vast quantities of art, the haystack. A subset of the collections turned out to be great investments, and they were held for a sufficiently long period of time to allow the portfolio return to converge upon the return of the best elements in the portfolio." That's all that happens. I like how they end up. That's all that happens. So in other words, they've got some real winners inside of a portfolio of a bunch of losers. Okay. Berggren literally could have been wrong most of the time in his art collecting and still end up stupendously right. And that's one of the keys. You don't have to be right all the time. Let me give you another example. Walt Disney. Now, I know Disney's been in the media and they've been bashed, but if we go all the way back to the founder, Walt Disney, the man, his first studio went bankrupt. He had about 400 early cartoons, and they were short. They were loved by viewers. Steamboat Willie put them on the map back in the 30s, but they were enormously expensive and financed at outrageous terms. Well, along came Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and that changed everything. It earned $8 million in the first 6 months of 1938. Can you imagine that in today's dollars? I haven't even done the homework to find out what $8 million in today's dollars, but that's an enormous sum of money The company was able to pay all of its debts. It was able to retain key employees, and it got a new state-of-the-art studio in Burbank, as well as a celebrity status for Walt Disney. Here's the thing. Anything hugely successful is generally the result of an outlier. What Morgan Housel in his book, The Psychology of Money, calls a tail event. We call it a long tail. An outlier that is one in thousands or one in millions. That's how, generally speaking, hugely successful firms become that way. You say, well, that's art, that's cartoons. Well, how about venture capital? Venture capital firms work on the exact same principle. Here's one, Correlation Ventures. They decided to do a study, an internal study of their own firm, and they found out that from 2004 to 2014, a decade, they had done over 21,000 venture deals. 65% of those, over 2/3, lost money. So over 14,000 of them. Only 2.5% made a 10x return, a 10-bagger, as Peter Lynch used to call it in his book, One Up on Wall Street, written back in the 90s. 1%, just 1% made more than 20%, and only about 0.5%, around 100 companies, earned 50x or more. And yet we think that every single deal that they're doing is earning them enormous amounts of money. What happens is the outliers, the handful of needles in a giant haystack, end up making most of the money. This happens with companies all across the United States. Take the index called the Russell 3000. Okay, so it's a large index. It comprises thousands of companies, and you had to be hugely successful just to be included on it, right? 40%, since that index was founded over 30 years ago, 40% of those companies lost at least 70% of their value. By all accounts, failures. Almost all of the index returns of the Russell 3000 in history have come from 7%. 7% of the companies that were outperformers. This is fascinating. Here's a statement by Warren Buffett that he said years ago at his 2013 Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting. He says, I've personally owned 400 to 500 stocks during my life and made most of my money on not 100, not 50. He said, on 10 of them. 10 out of 400 to 500. It seems like this principle of really the outlier driving a lot of success is valid across many industries, including finance. Here's a great statement to cap it off. George Soros said this, it's not whether you're right or wrong that's important, but how much money you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong. And in our next segment, we're going to talk about how to make sure you're positioned to make good money when you're right and how you're positioned to avoid catastrophic losses when you're wrong. That's one of the key principles of becoming financially independent. And as I'm talking to people every single day like you, and my team is serving people all across the Front Range, we've learned what it means to develop what we call a financial independence roadmap. And it starts with having a great conversation about your goals, your dreams, your values. We visit about that in our beautiful offices or on Zoom, and we learn what's really important to you, and then we sit down and develop a plan so you can achieve it. And here's the problem. If you don't have a written plan, as the old adage goes, failing to plan is planning to fail. We want to help you. We want to help you in the same way we've helped thousands of other people. It all begins with a simple conversation.